From 1775 to 1787, the American Revolution was fought between Great Britain and the 13 colonies allied with France. The French, who had previously been in conflict with the British and still had terrible relations, had spent a lot of money in attempting to help the colonies gain independence and effectively get back at the British. However, they were already in the midst of money trouble, and this, coupled with the lavish spendings of King Louis XVI, sent them spiraling into debt. The common folk, who had been poor to begin with, were beginning to run out of food and growing restless. The social classes of France at this time were split into three groups, known as estates. The first and second estate were made up of clergy, nobility, and royalty. The third, however, made up mostly of peasants, represented most of the population, controlled a disproportionately small amount of the wealth, and were the only ones who had to pay the tally, the chief tax of France. Though most of the peasants were unemployed and in the midst of economic crisis, the royal family continued to spend money frivolously. Queen Marie Antoinette was known for this irresponsible spending and wore expensive gowns and hairstyles daily. This upset the peasants even more and caused a resentment of the royals among the commoners. Then, in 1786, an idea was proposed to the king to stop exempting the aristocratic people from paying the land tax. To avoid revolt from both sides, the king called an Estates General meeting. The meeting, which was scheduled to take place on May 5, 1789, would be the first meeting since 1614. When the meeting took place, the Third Estate suggested a constitutional government, and that the other two estates would start paying taxes. However, the voting system for the Estate General meeting was rigged against the Third Estate, despite the fact that they represented most of the population. They attempted to revise the system, but were ultimately shut down. Following this failure, the Third Estate's representatives decided to start having their own meetings and referred to themselves as the National Assembly. On June 20th, they went to meet, but the doors were locked. They went on to a local tennis court to write the new constitution. There, they took an oath to work until they achieved constitutional reform. This was called the Tennis Court Oath. Eventually, the king was forced to accept them as a new assembly. Meanwhile, the rest of France was continuing to grow impatient and angry. On July 14th, a mob went down to the Bastille, a fortress rumored to hold tons of weapons and gunpowder. With the assistance of some of the French guard, the mob broke in and fought for 7 hours before the warden surrendered and was beheaded. The mob found no ammunition, but demolished the building brick by brick. This event is often regarded as the beginning of the French Revolution. Soon after, a riot of hysteria and fear grew across the countryside. Peasants broke into and destroyed homes of lords and tax collectors, and the uprising became known as La Grande Peur, or the Great Fear. On October 5th, thousands of women marched from Paris to Versailles and forced the king to accept the decrees of the National Assembly and move to Paris to be closer to his people. There, he would be practically imprisoned and closely watched over by his people. These events were the start of a more violent and radical portion of the revolution. September 3, 1791. The National Assembly completed the new constitution. It set up a limited monarchy and sorted citizens into groups based on tax payments that allowed or permitted them from voting, while still allowing the king veto power and appointment of ministers. However, though the old way of government had been eradicated, the new one found little support either. The king and monarchs despised the loss of power, the church began to lose land and support, and many poor families did not think it offered enough change. With the revolution continuing to grow more violent, this argument merely fueled the fire and the hatred of the people. At this time, the revolution was so powerful that joining a political club grew necessary, and choosing the right one was even more imperative. Two of the most popular were the Girondins, who approached situations peacefully and with balance and were pro-republic. The other party, the Jacobins, were more violent-minded and insisted on radical change, though also being pro-republic. One of the most important points argued upon by these groups was the idea of war with foreign powers. Many of France's neighboring countries, most notably Austria, felt their nations were threatened by the revolution and loss of structural government in France. They believed it could lead to uprising within their own countries. Austria, along with its ally Prussia, threatened to declare war on France in order to end the revolution and reinstate the monarchy. The Girondins argued to declare war themselves, believing it would unite the people. The Jacobins thought it would put too much pressure on the already weak government and was not worth the possible consequences of a loss. The decision was put on hold, though, as in June of 1971, the king and his family made an unavailing attempt to flee the country. He was captured on the border of Varennes and brought back to Paris to await a possible trial. In October of 1791, the Legislative Assembly met to revise the Constitution and allow the king to be put on trial. The Jacobins convinced the Legislative Assembly to put the king on trial, and on accusations of treason, the king was sent to the guillotine on January 21, 1793. Marie Antoinette would follow only 9 months later. With them, the newly instated limited monarchy died as well. Following the death of the king, prisoners awaiting the guillotine were released, including Napoleon Bonaparte. Despite this, the Reign of Terror continued. The Committee of Public Safety took over control and executed 1,800 citizens in the uprise-prone city of Lyon and Nantes. Led by Robespierre, they attempted to set up a republic of virtue by changing many laws and ways that would instill the ideas of the Enlightenment, such as widespread education and equality. However, he and the rest of the National Convention continued to destroy and execute their political opponents, causing a new group to form who opposed them. On July 27, 1794, he and some of his political opponents were arrested. Before being put to death, Robespierre attempted to shoot himself, but only injured his jaw. On July 28th, he was beheaded. With the Reign of Terror over, the National Convention attempted to set up yet a new form of government. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before they were nearly back under a monarchy like the one they had just come out of, as well as a war with Napoleon's rise to power. The French Revolution, the bloody, near decimation of a nation, while being completely unsuccessful in its original intentions of governmental reform, still spread Enlightenment ideals and laws, which would eventually better society. It also allowed some peasants to gain more land from the church, as well as more freedom, liberty, and equality. However, as of 1800 and going into the Napoleonic era, it seemed clear that France's revolution had failed.